Los Angeles Death Row Record Studio, 2:17 a.m., October 15, 1993. Prince stood in the center of the smoke-filled room, surrounded by 15 young rappers who looked at him like he was a relic from another planet. The studio reeked of marijuana and expensive cologne, thick haze hanging in the air like judgment itself. Red LED lights pulsed in rhythm with the music. The 808 drums pounded through the walls, bass so heavy it felt like a heartbeat in his chest. Snoop Dogg leaned against the mixing board, gold chains catching the red studio lights. Dr. Dre sat behind the console, arms crossed, wearing that expression that said, "Prove yourself or get out." "Old school finished, homie. This is our time now," said a kid who couldn't have been older than 22, his voice dripping with confidence. The beat machine kept cycling, that hypnotic loop that had taken over radio, MTV, everything Prince had once dominated. Prince's hand trembled slightly as he gripped his guitar neck, sweat beginning to bead on his palms despite the studio's air conditioning. In this room, surrounded by these kings of a new sound, his purple majesty meant nothing. Worse, it made him look like a costume party in a war zone. "You want to prove you're still relevant?" The young rapper's voice cut through the thick air like a blade. "Spit some bars, purple boy." The silence that followed was suffocating. 15 pairs of eyes locked onto Prince, waiting for him to either step up or step out. The beat kept going, relentless, demanding an answer he didn't know how to give. That moment, Prince realized he was either about to prove that creativity has no expiration date or watch his legend die in a cloud of marijuana smoke. 2 weeks earlier, MTV Music Awards backstage, Prince had just finished performing Seven, his latest single that had barely cracked the top 40. Walking off stage, his ears caught fragments of conversation from the hip-hop nominees gathered in the VIP area. Ice Cube's laugh carried across the room as he spoke to a group of young artists. "Prince? That dude's history, man. R&B is dead. Hip-hop runs this game now. Purple Rain was like 10 years ago." The words hit harder than any bad review ever had. Prince kept walking, but something inside him shifted. For 15 years, he'd been untouchable. The artist who redefined music, who made stadiums weep and dance simultaneously. Now in 1993, he was watching from the sidelines as a new generation claimed his throne. That night, alone at Paisley Park, Prince sat at his piano and tried to understand what had changed. The world was moving faster, getting harder, more street. These young artists spoke a language of beats and samples, of raw truth that connected to something his polished perfection couldn't touch. They didn't just make music. They made statements, manifestos, anthems of rebellion that spoke to millions of young people who saw Prince as their parents' music. The wake-up call came 3 days later. A fax machine at Paisley Park churned out a message from Suge Knight at Death Row Records. "Your boy think he's still the king? Prove it. Our house, our rules. Friday night, 2 a.m. Come alone." Prince stared at the paper for 10 minutes. His manager, his entire team would call this career suicide. Death Row Records was the most dangerous label in music, home to artists who lived the street life they rapped about. But something in Prince's pride, that same fire that had driven him to master 27 instruments, made the decision for him. "Get me a ticket to Los Angeles." For 1 week, Prince did something he'd never done before. He studied, not music theory or chord progressions, but the language of hip-hop. He bought every rap album he could find, dissected beats, analyzed flows. At 3 a.m. in his home studio, he practiced rapping over simple drum patterns, his voice cracking, words stumbling over each other like a teenager learning to play guitar. "I need to learn their language to speak to them," he told himself, but frustration mounted with each failed attempt. This wasn't how Prince created music. He built from melody, from harmony, from the inside out. Hip-hop seemed to work in reverse, starting with rhythm and adding everything else later. His team begged him to reconsider. "Prince, this is insane. These aren't just musicians, they're—" But Prince cut them off. "Sometimes you have to risk everything to prove everything." Friday night arrived faster than Prince wanted. Death Row Records' Tarzana studio complex looked like a fortress. Security everywhere. Luxury cars parked like monuments to success. Prince's town car felt pathetically small next to the lowriders and Benzes. As he walked through the metal detectors, past the gold plaques covering every wall, one truth became clear. This was their world, and he was just visiting. Suge Knight met him in the lobby, 6'4" of pure intimidation, wearing a red death row jersey. "Welcome to the real-world Purple Prince." His handshake was a statement, firm enough to remind Prince that in this building, respect wasn't given. It was earned. The studio tour felt like psychological warfare. Platinum plaques for Doggy Style, The Chronic, albums that had sold millions while Prince's recent releases struggled. Young artists lounged in leather chairs, their eyes following him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. To them, he wasn't Prince the Revolutionary, he was Prince the Relic. Studio A was packed when they finally entered. Dr. Dre sat at a mixing board that looked like a spaceship, surrounded by the architects of West Coast rap. Warren G., Snoop Dogg, even Eazy-E had shown up to witness what everyone assumed would be a massacre. Prince took a seat in the corner, his guitar case looking completely out of place among the turntables and samplers. "So check it," Dr. Dre's voice carried the weight of someone who'd never lost a musical battle. "We heard you wanted to see how the new generation does things. Cool, but if you're going to be here, you got to participate, no spectators." The beat dropped like a physical force. Heavy 808s, simple but killer, the kind of foundation that had defined a decade. All eyes turned to Prince, waiting for him to step to the microphone. "Now show us what you got, legend." Prince approached the mic stand like it was a snake that might bite. His purple shirt was already damp with sweat. He opened his mouth and nothing. The words he'd practiced for a week vanished. His voice, when it finally came, sounded thin and shaky against the thunderous beat. "Yo, I'm Prince and, uh," his rhythm was completely off, voice cracking like a 13-year-old. The room erupted in barely contained laughter. "Man, this dude can't even stay on beat," someone whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Somebody call security. This man having a breakdown." Prince's hands started shaking. He couldn't hold the microphone steady, couldn't find the pocket in the rhythm that seemed so natural to everyone else in the room. This was public humiliation on a level he'd never experienced. At award shows, he might get snubbed. Here, he was being laughed at by kids half his age. "This was a mistake," Prince muttered, moving toward the door. But Snoop's voice stopped him. Nah, you came here to prove something. Don't run now." As Prince sat in that corner chair, head in his hands, listening to the continued laughter, a memory surfaced with crystal clarity. 7 years old, sitting at his father's piano, struggling to reach the pedals. His small fingers fumbling over keys that seemed impossibly wide. "Every instrument speaks a different language, son," his father had said, his weathered hands guiding Prince's across the keyboard. "But music is the same in every language. You just have to find the part of the language that belongs to you." He looked up at the young faces around him, no longer seeing enemies but fellow musicians speaking a dialect he didn't yet understand. But what if he didn't need to speak their exact language? What if he could show them his own? "I don't need to rap like you," Prince said, standing up and walking to his guitar case. "I need to rap like me." The room watched in confusion as Prince plugged his guitar directly into the studio's mixing board. His hands stopped shaking the moment they touched the strings. Without asking permission, he started playing over Dr. Dre's beat, not competing with the 808s, but dancing around them, finding spaces in the rhythm that no one knew existed. "This is not hip-hop. This is not R&B," Prince said into the microphone as his fingers found a melody that transformed the entire track. "This is something else." The laughter stopped so abruptly it was like someone had hit a kill switch. Dr. Dre leaned forward in his chair, his producer instincts immediately recognizing something revolutionary happening in real time. This wasn't just good. This was different. This was the sound he'd been unconsciously searching for without knowing it. Prince wasn't trying to rap fast or hard or street. He was singing over the beat, but the melody was so perfectly locked into the rhythm that it became a new form of music entirely. "Every generation thinks they invented music," Prince sang rapped, his voice finding confidence as his guitar painted colors over the stark beats. Each note was precisely placed, his fingers dancing across the fretboard with surgical precision. But sound just evolves, it's never exclusive. The young teach the old and the old teach the young. Every voice in the mix makes the whole song stronger. Then he did something that made everyone in Studio A freeze. He played a guitar solo in the middle of a rap beat. Not a rock solo, not a funk solo, but something that belonged exactly where it was, expanding the definition of what hip-hop could contain. Warren G was the first to speak. He just created a new genre. Eazy-E, who hadn't said a word all night, nodded slowly. This is different, but this is dope. For the next 6 hours, something historic happened in that Tarzana studio. Prince and the Death Row family created music that had never existed before. Dr. Dre laid down beats while Prince painted melodies over them. Snoop contributed verses that Prince answered with sung choruses. Young rappers who'd come to embarrass a legend found themselves learning from a master who was learning from them. They called the track Purple Chronic, though it would never be officially released. Too experimental for radio, too revolutionary for the industry to understand. Warner Brothers couldn't figure out how to market it. Death Row couldn't figure out how to categorize it. It existed in a space between worlds that the music business wasn't ready to acknowledge. But everyone in that room knew they'd witnessed something special. The moment when two generations stopped competing and started collaborating. The track itself was unlike anything that had ever been recorded. Prince's guitar lines weaved through Dre's beats like golden thread through dark fabric. Snoop's voice floated over melodies that made his words sound like poetry instead of just rap. Warren G's keyboard work created bridges between sounds that had no business working together, but somehow created perfect harmony. For 22 minutes and 37 seconds, the impossible became inevitable. Years later, when bootleg copies of the session surfaced, music scholars would analyze every note, every beat, every vocal inflection. They would call it the missing link between old school and new school, the Rosetta Stone that translated between generations of black music. Hip-hop historians would mark that October night as the moment when the genre stopped being just about rebellion and started being about evolution. But in the moment, as those 6 hours unfolded, it felt less like making history and more like having a conversation. A conversation between fathers and sons, between past and future, between what was and what could be. Prince learned that street credibility wasn't about where you came from, but about the truth you brought to the microphone. The young rappers learned that technical skill and emotional depth weren't enemies, but allies in the fight to make music that mattered. As the sun came up over Los Angeles, casting golden light through the studio windows, Prince packed his guitar while Snoop walked him to his car. The morning air was crisp, a stark contrast to the heated intensity of the night. "You ain't old school or new school," the young rapper said. "You're just school." Prince smiled, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Relevant. Not because he'd tried to become something he wasn't, but because he'd shown a new generation what evolution really meant. "Music is language," Prince replied, his voice carrying the weight of the night's journey. "Tonight I became bilingual." As he settled into the passenger seat, he looked back at the studio one last time. The same building that had threatened to end his relevance had instead shown him how to extend it. The kid who had challenged him stood in the doorway, no longer an enemy, but a teacher who had helped him find his way back to himself. The ripple effects lasted for decades. Hip-hop began incorporating live instruments in ways it never had before. R&B artists started experimenting with harder beats, finding middle ground between melody and rhythm that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. The wall between genres became more porous, more creative. Record labels, initially confused by this fusion, soon scrambled to recreate the magic that had happened in that Tarzana studio. Within months, you could hear Prince's influence in everything from Janet Jackson's "That's the Way Love Goes" to the way rock guitarists started approaching rap collaborations. Musicians who had never spoken to each other began reaching across generational and stylistic divides, looking for the kind of creative synthesis that had happened that October night. And Prince? He never tried to compete with young artists again. Instead, he showed them how to expand their own definitions of what was possible. His subsequent albums contained elements of hip-hop production, but always filtered through his unique musical vision. The lesson wasn't that old school should become new school, but that both could learn from each other without losing their essential selves. The mythical Purple Chronic track became legend in music circles. Bootleg copies traded hands like rare artifacts, passed between collectors who spoke in hushed tones about the night Prince jammed with Death Row. Music students studied the rough mixes that leaked years later, trying to understand how two seemingly incompatible worlds had found common language. Some say copies still exist in private collections, hidden in the vaults of collectors who understand their historical importance. Dr. Dre reportedly kept a master copy in his personal studio, playing it for artists who needed to understand that innovation comes from risk, not comfort. The night became shorthand in hip-hop circles for the kind of collaboration that transcends competition. Prince had shown them that respect wasn't about submission, it was about recognition. So what language are you afraid to learn? What generation are you afraid to talk to? What style of creativity have you been avoiding because it's not your genre? Drop a comment below if this story reminded you that innovation comes from fusion, not competition, and hit that subscribe button because the next untold story is waiting. Remember, respect isn't about proving you're better than the new generation. It's about proving you can evolve with them.